Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Vicki Titanic, and I'm the town clerk here at the Town of Oakville. And this information session is being hosted jointly by the Halton Region and all of its area municipalities. So I'd like to welcome my colleagues and counterparts from the region, the City of Burlington, and the towns of Halton Hills and Milton. Today's session is all about getting a better understanding of the roles and the duties of elected officials. Whether or not you've made up your mind about running for an elected position, this session will hopefully provide you with some useful takeaways to help you in whichever path you choose to take. So your interest in this session shows that you're actively engaged in your community, and we all applaud you for that. Municipal governments are closely connected with the day-to-day life of every Ontario resident, and for you to consider getting closely involved with your municipal government means that you will be potentially making a significant impact on other residents, businesses, and organizations. So with us this evening, we're happy to have our host, Fred Dean, who will lead the session. Fred is a municipal coach and former municipal solicitor. He has delivered numerous orientation and counselor training sessions across Ontario and has a wealth of information that he will share with you tonight. Before I hand it over to Fred, though, I just want to mention that this information session will not go into details about how to file a nomination or anything about campaign rules. We encourage you to connect with your municipality for those finer details. And also, before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. If you could ensure that your Zoom username is the name that you are registered with. We will not be granting permissions to speak to any unknown, anonymous, inappropriate, or any generic usernames like the user's iPad. We'd like to know who you are. After Fred's presentation, we'll take your questions. So to ask a question, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll allow you to unmute yourself at that time. But if you have a general question, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type out the question, and we'll acknowledge that question and try to respond after Fred's presentation. So also note that this meeting is being live streamed and archived to YouTube. So if you participate, you will appear and or be heard on the live stream and on YouTube. If you are having technical difficulties at any time during the session, please email townclerk@oakville.ca for assistance. And now it's my pleasure to hand over the session to Fred Dean. Fred.
Vicki, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I do a lot of training with municipal governments, and I have to tell you that this session that is every 4 years, a few months before the election, around the time nomination day opens, I think is probably the most important session that I do. If you are thinking of running for council, I congratulate you. Whether you end up doing that or not, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's a huge step to become part of the leadership of the community, and certainly requires, I think, a lot of consideration both on your own and with respect conversations with your family. It requires people of integrity and vision in municipal councils today. One of the things I think that I want to spend a bit of time on this evening is the fact that local governments, cities and towns and villages and townships and regions are the most transparent and open levels of government we have in Canada. And I'll demonstrate that to you in a little while. So expect that if you are going to be involved with this, that the decision-making process you are a part of will be open to the public, be able to see and to watch and to evaluate. Can we get the PowerPoint? There we go. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to spend much time on this other than to say that I've had the opportunity of working with a number of municipalities 23 years of which I was in the city of Sudbury as the city solicitor and part of the transition team that put the new city back in together in 2001. I've been part of an organization, Amberley Gavel Limited, that has done closed meeting investigations for about 140 municipalities, and we did that for about 11 years. We've also been integrity commissioners, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. As I say, this session is really significant. The sessions I do with new councils and new heads of council are important, no question about it. But the opportunity tonight to spend some time, think about whether it's appropriate for you to run for council, I think is really, really important. So what are we going to do? Well, we're fast approaching May 2nd, and May 2nd is the magic date in which you can file as a candidate for the upcoming municipal election. And you have all the way through till August 19th at 2 in the afternoon to file your papers and meet all the requirements of the Municipal Elections Act. I'm not here to talk about, as Vicki said, I'm not here to talk about election issues as such. Rather, I'm going to focus on a little bit about local government, how it functions, some things around municipal powers, because I think that's important if you're considering running for council, in terms of what powers you think you have if you are elected. And I'll spend a few minutes on accountability and transparency. Interestingly, when I get called by a municipality during the term of council because their municipality is having some difficulties, often it relates to the issue of roles and responsibilities. Who's responsible to do what and in what context? So we'll spend some time on that. I'm then going to shift gears a bit and talk about personal considerations, family considerations, but also codes of conduct for council members and conflict of interest. And then I'll finish off talking about confidentiality and a little bit about water, because I think water gives us a clear example of responsibilities that a member of council takes on. If this were a live event, as it is, we're in the council chamber here in Oakville, and we were 4 years ago, and we did this exercise, and I invited people in the audience to let's develop a list and talk about what local governments do in your community and for the people in the community. We're not going to do that tonight. It doesn't work very well when we're online. But take a blank piece of paper when this is over and write down as many things that you can think of that a local government does for you. And if you get to 75, you've done okay. They're well over 100. And instead of writing down what I call 30,000-foot items, bring it down to right down to ground level. So for example, don't just write down roads, but write down roads, municipalities create them, maintain them, regulate them, put in sidewalks for people to walk on, and have a number of services that are within the road allowance. And so the roads form a conduit, if you will. So break down each category that you can think of, spend a bit of time. One of the areas that is really interesting is that there are some local services that council can't provide. For example, if the council in your municipality, if people in the community want to have a library, public library system, council can't do that because the province has said that public libraries are the responsibilities of a board, a local board. Now there's a relationship between the municipality and the local board, the public library board, but the service itself has to be offered and has to be run by the public library board itself and not council. There are other local boards as well, health unit, police services board, Conservation Authority. There are a number of them. Do the list. It's a really interesting exercise. And if you can get to 75, pat yourself on the back. And if you can get to 100, good for you. That's really, you have a sense of what local government does. The fact is, the scope of the services provided by local government is huge. The responsibilities for all of those services at the end of the day rest with council. And most of those services are highly regulated and really technical. So it's important that council be getting good advice from staff and from others in terms of making decisions when it comes to all of these services. Let's talk for a minute about municipal powers. Municipalities are, you've heard the phrase, creatures of the province, and that's true. That's entirely true. And that was evidenced recently in the Supreme Court of Canada decision relating to the City of Toronto. You'll recall that 4 years ago, the province reduced the size of City Council in Toronto by half right in the middle of the campaign. And at the end of the day, the court said that the province had the authority and the ability to do that because the municipality was, in fact, a creature of the provincial government. All powers that a municipality has, all powers come from the province. There's no inherent jurisdiction. You can't just make it up. You can't just decide you're going to get into something unless you can source back to that provincial authority. And it's found in a statute or an act or a regulation under it. In 2001, there was a significant event in local government, and that is there was a brand new municipal act written from top to bottom, first time in 150 years. Under the old act, pre-2001, municipalities received powers from the province based on size. So villages got a few and townships a few, towns more, small cities and big cities. All of that disappeared. It all changed with the new act. And now there are only 3 kinds of municipalities in the province. They're single tier, and that's all of Northern Ontario and a few selected places around the south. And the single-tier municipalities get this bundle of powers from the province, and they get all of the powers. So now a township like Ear Falls in northwestern Ontario, not a very big place, has all of the same powers as another single-tier like the City of Ottawa or the City of London. In our case here, we're dealing with 2 other kinds of municipalities. First is upper tier. And in our situation here, that's the region. Region of Halton is an upper tier municipality. And as Vicki indicated when she did the introduction, there are 4 municipalities under or within the scope of the region. And those 4 municipalities are referred to as local municipalities. Here's the thing. The bundle of powers that the province gives to municipalities is divvied up between the upper tier and the lower tier municipalities. And it changes in different parts of the province. So some regions have some powers, others don't. The other upper tier municipality is called a county. And so there are counties outside generally the GTA, and they have, again, municipalities that are cities and towns and townships, and those powers get divided up amongst them. When the new act came out in 2001, I read Section 5, and I read it, it's pretty short, and I read it probably half a dozen times. It is, in my opinion, maybe the most important section in the entire Municipal Act. The Municipal Act is a really substantial document, several hundred, I think close to 500 sections in it. It's a big statute. It's not the only one that applies to municipalities, though. There are over 100 provincial statutes that apply to local government in Ontario. It's pretty complex in terms of what's involved with it. But Section 5 of the Municipal Act said this, that powers of a municipality shall be exercised by council and shall be exercised by bylaw. So why is that so important? Well, it doesn't say municipal powers shall be exercised by individual members of council or by the head of council or by staff. It says that the power shall be exercised by council by bylaw. And the significance of it being a bylaw is this. Municipalities throughout the province, and by the way, there are 444 municipalities around the province, and all of these principles apply to every single one of them. To pass a bylaw, council must pass it at what I call a duly constituted meeting. And there are a number of elements to that. Firstly, the municipality has to give notice. You have to tell the public as a municipality that you're holding a council meeting, whether that council meeting is a regular council meeting or a special council meeting. You have to give notice if you're holding a committee meeting. The public is entitled to know two things. Firstly, that you're meeting, and secondly, what items are on the agenda for deliberation. In other words, what decisions will council be asked to make at the meeting. So the notice will include the agenda for the meeting. That's really important. The public should have an opportunity to see what is coming before council. This notice requirement applies whether it's an open meeting or a closed meeting. And if it's a closed meeting, there's still a series of rules that have to be in place. And the public has to be aware, has to know what is coming and what the general nature of the matter for the closed meetings. And that applies both to council and to committees. I said before that to pass a bylaw, the meeting must be open to the public. There's a provision in the Municipal Act that says all meetings shall be open to the public. I'll get to the exception to that in just a minute. But the fundamental principle is all meetings shall be open to the public. The public has the opportunity to attend. And in fact, the courts have said that the primary role of the public at a council meeting is to observe, is to watch how decisions are being made, how policy is being set. The next requirement, there must be a quorum. Now, I have to admit, I'm not good at math, so I always create councils of 5 people because it's much simpler. So if we have a council of 5, there has to be a quorum present. A quorum means a majority. In the case of council of 5, that means at least 3 people, 3 members, must be in attendance. Calculate the size of your council. By the way, when you do that, include the head of council as one of the number and calculate what quorum is in order to hold a meeting. The next rule is that majority prevails. So those people, those members who are at a meeting, if a majority of those present vote in favor, then the bylaw or the resolution is passed and is in place. So let's do our 5-person council again. If all 5 are there, 3 have to vote in favor of it in order to pass the bylaw. If there are only 3 present, however, how many have to vote in favor? Well, 2. Interestingly, that's less than the majority of the members of council, but that's what the legislation allows and that's what it provides for. The final provision around the duly constituted meeting is that everybody votes. Everybody has a vote on council, including the head of council, including the chair of the council itself. Fundamental. So in order to exercise power, council has to have in place has to do so at a duly constituted meeting, and they have to tell the public. There has to be a meeting that's open to the public. There has to be a quorum present, majority votes, and everybody votes. Last 2 years have been interesting because our meetings have been not in person, but virtual. And the same rules apply. If the public, if it's a meeting that's open to the public as required, the public has to have access via Zoom or whatever medium that you're using at the time. It's important. You cannot eliminate the public merely because it's a virtual meeting. I talked about accountable and transparent government and how accountable and transparent local government really is. And I think it's important to put this in context. So let me just give you a few examples. I said that meetings have to be open to the public unless there is specific reason to go into a closed meeting. And there are 3 points that I think are important to keep in mind. There is a list of subject matters in the Municipal Act that says that council or a committee of council may go into a closed meeting for one of these subject matters. No other subject matter other than ones that are on the list. So that's the first thing, the subjects. The second thing is how council gets into a closed meeting. And this is another part of transparency. There must be a resolution passed at a public meeting that says council's going to have a closed meeting and here's the subject matter. The public is entitled to know that there is a closed meeting, and the public is entitled to know what the general nature of the matter to be dealt with at the closed meeting. The third part is what can be done at a closed meeting, and there are rules around the types of votes that can be taken at a closed meeting of council or a committee of council. All of this has to be in place, and closed meetings or allegedly improperly held closed meetings are subject to review by an investigator, closed meeting investigator. As I indicated earlier, I was part of an organization that did closed meeting investigations. We probably did over those years in excess of 140 reports to councils. So open meetings are one classic example of how the public is entitled to observe, and that's part of being open and accountable and transparent. There are some other policies, or some policies that council has to have in place. The list on the screen, I just want to mention a couple of these. If you are thinking of running for council, I encourage you to take a look at the accountability and transparency policy. Every municipality has to have that. In fact, every municipality has to have all of these policies in place. You should be able to go to the municipal website and find a copy of that. And that will help you understand how councils are transparent in the way they make decisions and how they are accountable to the public and beyond. The other one that I want to mention is a relatively new one, and it's called the Council Member Staff Policy. Now notice it doesn't say council staff policy, it says council member. This deals with the individual members of council and the relationship with staff. Take a look at that policy because it will be of assistance to you. Also, it ties in to the code of conduct for municipal councillors. So some real examples of how local government is accountable and how it's transparent. I said before that roles and responsibilities, or who does what within the organization, is really critical. It's really important, and often it's the one place that municipalities get off the rails to some extent. Interestingly enough, the roles and responsibilities, these job descriptions, if you will, are set out in the Municipal Act. So it isn't each municipality that is creating what's appropriate. It is, in fact, set out in the legislation itself. So I want to take a look at the role of council, the role of the head of council, I'll talk about who that is in a moment, and staff, the role of staff or the administration within a municipal organization. Each has a specific function, and I think if you're thinking of running for council, it's important to have a sense of what the Act requires and, in fact, what the Act doesn't permit. So let's take a look at these, and let's start with council. Council is like a board of directors of a private corporation. Municipalities, by the way, are corporations. They're municipal corporations. They have specific responsibilities. They're not business corporations. They're a unique entity. But the council exercises power. We talked about that and how it does it by bylaw. So council is the body that exercises corporate powers. The Act says that council represents the public. There's no surprise there. The members of council are communicating with people in the community all the time in various ways and bringing the opinions of the public to the council table. The next one is interesting. There's an obligation on members of council to, as it says, consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. In this situation, municipality has a couple of meanings, two different meanings. One is your municipal community. That is, the boundaries of your municipality. So council has to consider the well-being and interests of this geographical area called Region of Halton or Town of Oakville, whatever. But it also can be read that council has to consider the interests of the municipal corporation when it talks about municipality. And that's not surprising. That's a pretty fundamental concept. In fact, every municipality in the province has insurance policies, and those policies provide contractually that not only council members but staff act in the best interests of the municipal corporation. So it's pretty fundamental. And in my experience, members of council may differ in their views, but they all are in large measure acting on the best interests of what they perceive as the best interests of the municipality, the geographical boundaries of it. I've talked about acting collectively, acting publicly, and with notice. That's a council meeting. Very simply, that's a council meeting. You act collectively, the votes are taken, the vote is taken, and the majority, as I said before, prevails. There is nothing in the Municipal Act, or indeed in any other act, that gives a management role to council or to members of council. That's really fundamental. If you're thinking of running because you want to direct work and organize work within the municipality, that's not your role. Your role is part of the council that is setting policy and making decisions. And I think it's a really important aspect to understand if you're thinking of running for council. It's really important. The powers of individual members of council are limited. They don't have as much power as a lot of people think they do. People are going to come to you if you're elected to solve their problems. And often you cannot, at least certainly not on your own, solve the problems. You're going to need help if it's a matter that's within the jurisdiction of the municipality. There are limitations, and once elected, staff will review with the new members and with, in fact, the new council some of the limitations that are imposed on individual members of council. Remember I talked about the old act, the pre-2001 act. In that municipal act, there was a reference to mayors and wardens and reeves and chairs. And they were all different heads of council. Mayor for towns and cities, reeves for townships and villages, wardens for counties, and chairs for regions. That all changed. The Municipal Act now just refers to the head of council. And municipalities, in large part, have continued the reference to mayors. So we have mayors in the municipalities in the region of Halton. We have a chair at the region. In counties, that's where you'll find wardens. Some municipalities, townships, have changed the name, and they now have the ability to do that. How do they do it? Pass a bylaw. Change the name from reeve to mayor. County of Renfrew went through this about 10 years ago, and the townships within the county decided collectively that they would change the name of the head of council from reeve, which was very traditional, historic, to head of council being the mayor. There's one exception in the province where the name is different, and that is a municipality that has a Lord Mayor. And that, interestingly, that power was given, or that ability was given back, I think, in the 1980s, and it's Niagara-on-the-Lake. Niagara-on-the-Lake has a Lord Mayor. Councils now, after 2001, can name the head of council. They can change the name if they think is appropriate, and that's what happened in Renfrew County. So whether we're talking about the regional chair or the mayors within the lower tier municipalities, here are some of the responsibilities, because they're all the same, no matter which level of government it is. Head of council presides over council meetings. In fact, the Act is far more explicit in terms of what it says, and it says that the meetings have to be efficient and effective. There's real skill to being a head of council and chairing council meetings. I have a chance to work with a lot of mayors over time, and it's a very different view of the world sitting in the mayor's chair than it is the other members of council. So it's an important exercise to be presiding over the meetings, and the Municipal Act requires it. The Act goes on to say that head of council provides leadership to council. Interestingly, it doesn't say provide leadership to the municipality. It says leadership to council, and we'll see in a few minutes where the leadership to the administration rests. We'll come to that. Heads of council have a unique responsibility, and that is heads of council speak on behalf of the municipality. That's an important power, and it's not given to other members of council, to councillors as we know them. So how does a head of council know what to speak and what to say and what to support? Well, the answer is municipalities speak through bylaws and through resolutions. So the head of council will be speaking to indicate the position that council had taken or has taken on any specific issue. Part of the leadership role, the heads of council across the province have an obligation to provide information and recommendations to members of council. And you can see some examples there: administration and controllership, excuse me, accountability and transparency. Heads of council don't do this alone. They have to seek some advice and some help from the chief administrative officer, from the treasurer, accountant, auditor, lawyer, come from various sources. But there's the obligation there on the head of council to provide advice and make recommendations to council itself. One of the big debates back, 15 years ago now, I guess, was the issue of what it means to be the chief executive officer. That language has been in the Municipal Act for a long time. And a debate occurred around whether that term should continue or whether it should disappear. And the municipal sector was kind of split in terms of whether it should stay or go. And the province decided that it should stay, but it should be defined. It should be clear what it means for a head of council to be the CEO, Chief Executive Officer, because we know in a business context that the Chief Executive Officer is responsible for day-to-day management. That's not true in the municipal context, and the province has made that clear. The day-to-day responsibility rests with the Chief Administrative Officer, and that role is set out in the legislation as well. So if you look at the responsibilities of the head of council as a CEO, what you're going to see is that it really reflects the head of council as the champion for the municipality. Important role, really significant, and the outstanding mayors that I've had a chance to work with over the years understand that their responsibility is to champion the municipality, represent the municipality. But there is no day-to-day management. There's no day-to-day management at all given to heads of council, just like the other members of council. So that's the elected side, if you will, the decision-making, policy-setting side, council responsibilities, and head of council responsibilities. Let's flip over for just a few minutes on the administration side, municipal staff. Again, the province has given a job description, and this one, frankly, I think is really good. It lays out the primary responsibilities of staff when it comes to working with council. First is that staff have to undertake research and provide advice to council. Well, what is that? Well, those are the reports that staff write that get included on agendas for council to give consideration to at a council meeting. Providing advice means making a recommendation. And staff have an obligation, at least in my opinion, have an obligation to make a recommendation to council. And that should be done by way of a motion, so that council members, when they read it, will know exactly what council is being asked to consider and what it's being asked to decide. It's really, really fundamental. So staff undertake research, provide advice, do the reports, make the recommendations. Council has to receive that, and that will be, as I say, in the agenda that's published and put out to the public. Once council makes a decision on a particular matter, staff has an obligation to implement that decision. That's an important principle. And it doesn't matter if staff recommended it or not. The reality is there's an obligation for staff to implement the decisions that are made by council. Every department in every municipality I've ever worked with has policy manuals in terms of how that department functions. These aren't council policies, these are staff policies, how to get the day-to-day work done. Whether it's public works or recreation or the clerk's office, there are administrative policies that set out procedures and just how you get things done. And why do you have to have those? Again, it reinforces the fact to carry out council's decisions. Council is the decision maker. I've used this slide for a long time in a lot of presentations over the years, and I debate whether to leave it in, but I love the image. Council should steer the boat rather than row it. And that is, council decides what services and what programs the municipality should be offering to the public and approving. And then it leaves it up to staff how to do it. Council steers the boat, staff rows it. It's from a book back, I think in the 1970s now, called Reinventing Government by Osborne and Gabler. Good image, and it kind of reminds us all, I think, what is appropriate in terms of each of our respective conduct and roles within the municipal organization. When I talk about municipal governance, what I'm talking about is how council makes decisions. And that's really fundamental, because that's the prime responsibility of council. So let's look at some of the aspects around council decision-making. We know from what we've just talked about that the primary resource for council in terms of information comes from staff. The province recognizes that, the expectation is there. Staff puts the agenda together based on the format that is set out in the procedure bylaw that has been approved by council. Staff is a primary resource. Another source that can be providing information to council is the committee structure that council has. I have to tell you that there are 444 municipalities, and there are probably that many different committee structures. Maybe not quite, but pretty close. There are a lot of different committee structures that municipalities use around the province. There are a few, not very many, that don't have any committees. They just have council. These are small communities, and they feel that it's appropriate to just have council making the decisions and receiving information from staff. Why does a municipality create committees? Well, in my view, council creates committees to provide advice to council and to make recommendations, to do some of the background work on a particular issue, perhaps. If council creates committees, it creates the mandate. It sets the mandate for the committee, what the responsibilities are. It populates the committee, that is, puts members onto the committee, may name a chair. Committees don't make decisions, they make recommendations to council. And that's really fundamental, I think. But it's another resource that council has to get good information on issues to allow it to make more effective decisions. The public has a role. Public has a huge role in providing advice to members of council. And that can happen outside of council meetings. And that clearly does happen, and we'll talk a bit about that in a few minutes. At council meetings, every council has the ability to regulate and determine how the public can speak to council. There's no inherent right for a member of the public to talk to council. Council makes the determination, and you should be able to find that in the procedure bylaw of the municipality. It's really fundamental, it's really important. I talked about local boards offering services where the council cannot. I'm not going to add any more to it than that. Here's a reality of local government. If you are thinking of running for council, you better love meetings. I mean, you better really love meetings, because there are a lot of them. I've had people say to me during these sessions, I thought it was 2 meetings a month, and that's all that was involved. Well, here's the reality. There will be at least 2 meetings of council a month, and maybe some special meetings. There'll be committee meetings, depending on the committee structure, and different members will be on different committees. Members will be appointed to local boards. You might have a ratepayers group in the community that you're attending meetings for those as well. There are a lot of meetings. And here's something you need to understand, I think. You better get good at it. Because if you don't get good at meetings and being effective at meetings, you're going to have a really frustrating 4 years. Because it's a long time, and you need to get some training and get some help in terms of how to become more effective. One of the things you need to look at is the procedure bylaw. And every municipality has its own procedure bylaw, and it sets out a number of things that are really critical, I think, if you're considering running for council. It sets out the rules. What are the rules for the meeting? Not only the meeting right there at the meeting, but also how you get to the meeting, how the documents are put together, what items get on an agenda, which ones don't, who gets to appear as a delegation. Procedure bylaw sets out your governance model, what committees you're going to have and what the reporting relationship is and what the mandate of those committees happens to be. It works and defines the relationship between the head of council and members of council, councillors. It talks about the relationship between council and staff at the meetings. And it talks about the relationship between the public and council at the meetings. This is a really important document. And it's one of the ones I urge you to take a look at, read through before you decide that you want to run for council. It is, I describe the procedure bylaw as one of the two most important documents in the municipality. The other is the annual budget. It sets your priorities as a council for the upcoming year and for the capital budget as well. But the procedure bylaw is a relationship document. It's how you function at meetings and how you everything gets put together to come to the meeting and what happens after, staff's role, individual members of council's role, and the head of council's role. So, governance, starting point is you better love meetings. And you better get good at it because it's a really significant part of the responsibility of members of council. So election day comes in October and you are elected to council and you are riding high. Everybody loves me. I'm on cloud 9. That won't last, but there you are, at least the beginning of it. People will treat you differently. Right from the beginning, people will treat you differently. People will see you on the street and they'll want to talk to you. They'll see you at the grocery store. They'll treat you in a different way than they had before. And they should. You're now a community leader. But you can expect that there's going to be a lot more attention paid to you. People are going to want to talk to you, and people are going to be listening to what you're saying, whether it's at council meetings, whether it's on social media or wherever it might be. People are paying attention to what you're saying. If you're elected to council, it is a 24/7 commitment. People will be calling you, contacting you at all hours. It just is the reality of it. I've known members of council for years, and they get phone calls and they get emails at odd hours of the night, and people expect that you'll respond to them. It is a huge commitment. And it requires a huge commitment. If you're not, you'll get really frustrated with it if this isn't what you want to be doing. I regularly talk to people who have left council or left municipal administration. Staff retire, or council members don't run again, or whatever. And I ask them about 6 months after they've left the municipality what their reaction is to not being there anymore, and they comment consistently is, I can't believe how much town hall or city hall just totally consumed me. It took every minute. I woke up in the night, that's what I was thinking of. It really does consume you. It's and it's hard to explain to people, but if you're living in this and working in this environment, it really is a substantial obligation on your part to give back to the community. It's at this time in this presentation, I put this last bullet point in that says two-tier. And I debate whether to tell you this story, but I think I'm going to do it tonight because I think it's an interesting one. This was about 10, 12 years ago. And I was doing a session similar to this in Eastern Ontario. And one of the people that was speaking as well was a former mayor. This is in a county system. He was on council as a councillor, and then decided that he was going to run for mayor. And he did. and he won. And he was a pretty happy guy. And he tells the story that he went home that night and he walked in the door and he said to his wife, I won. I'm going to be the mayor and I'm going to be on county council. And his 9-year-old, 8-year-old son came in and he said the same thing. I won. I'm going to be the mayor and I'm going to be on county council. I won. This 8-year-old said, I guess I lost. He understood the time commitment that was going to be part of that job. It is a huge time commitment. And so if you're thinking of running for a mayor's situation, understand that it's not just being the mayor of your community, it's also being a councillor on the county council. That is a significant increase in the workload that you have for it. Just give some thought to that as we go through this. I thought that was a tremendously powerful story. And it really, he said at the end of the day that he had to redefine what it meant as family and what it meant to be in local government. And he made some changes to try to make both of them work as best he could. But it was a pretty powerful statement by an 8-year-old. So talk to your significant other if you're thinking of running, because it involves them every bit as much. It's a family decision that has to be made. People will be calling you. People will be making reference on social media. Your kids will be reading it. Your significant other will be reading it. It has a huge impact on your family. Just take the time so that you've thought this through and you've given some thought to it. And the public will interact with your spouse as well as with you. If they aren't happy with what happened at council on a particular issue, and your spouse goes into a store that may impact, they will hear from the public or from the store people, depending on the issue. I talked about the fact you better love meetings, and there are a lot of meetings. Here's something else you better love. You better love to read. I mean, you have no idea how much paper, and whether it's paper or whether it's online, is going to be coming at you. It's a relentless, endless stream. And you have to read it all. And you have to read it for 2 reasons. First is the expectation. The expectation everybody has of you is that you've read it all and you are prepared for the meeting. That's only fair. But secondly, you have to read it all because buried in that pile of paper may be a pecuniary interest, a conflict. And you have to make sure that you are aware of every conflict of interest that is in the material that's coming to council. And if you miss it, there are consequences to it. So you're going to have to spend a lot of prep time reading. That's, again, time away from your family. But it's required in terms of your obligation to be prepared and be ready to debate and make decisions around setting policy. And I talked about the meetings. They take a lot of time, potentially. Let me just mention, this is kind of a slide that moves us into some others. I mentioned that there's no responsibility or no ability to micromanage. Micromanage means directing work, going to city staff or town staff and saying, do this. It's not your job. And it will create, in my experience, more difficulties between staff and council than any other single issue. It's a member of council who's trying to micromanage the work that staff have an obligation to do. Incivility has always been with us, but it has been highlighted, I think, in the last few years, and we're seeing it in substantial areas in some parts of the province. It's really become a significant issue. And we're seeing that because of the number of code of conduct violations, alleged violations that are being made. Incivility means you treat people at the council table, staff, and the public with respect. I said at the beginning, you need to have a vision and you need to have integrity. That's important. Both of those are significantly important for being a leader of the community and being on council. I'll talk about confidentiality in a few minutes because I think it's an area that you need to give some thought to and how important it is. So we'll come back to that in just a few minutes. When I talk about personal responsibilities, I want to talk about codes of conduct for members and the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. I think these are worth touching on, and you be aware of some of the issues around them. Up until about 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, there were a few municipalities that had codes of conduct for members of council. Not a lot. And they were all over the place. The codes looked really different. They weren't much the same. And they all had an integrity commissioner whose responsibility was to investigate complaints and report to council. That changed. It changed by the province saying that every municipality shall have a code of conduct. Every municipality shall have a code of conduct. And the role of the integrity commissioner will be expanded. Investigate, just as he or she did before, report to council, but also to educate members and the public on what the code of conduct is about. The province, when it brought this in, this mandatory requirement, passed a regulation under the Municipal Act that set out subject matters that must be included in the code of conduct. So every municipality had to include these items in the code. Some municipalities have gone beyond that. Some have stayed just to the regulation, and frankly, in my world, that's probably the better way to go. One of the items on that list is confidentiality. So there's an expectation by the province that members will treat the information that they receive in a confidential way, where it's appropriate. The other power given to integrity commissioners, and as I said, every municipality has to have one now, it's required, is the ability for a member of council to ask for an opinion from the integrity commissioner on the code of conduct or on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. That request has to be in writing, and the answer from the integrity commissioner has to be in writing. This is a real resource, I think, for members of council that wasn't there before. And it's an important one. Interestingly, there is currently, and I haven't checked in the last few days, but there's currently a bill before the province of Ontario. This bill is what is introduced, and it goes through the 3 readings and all the rest before it becomes law. Let me read you the title of this bill. It's called the Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act 2022. Let me say that again. The Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act 2022. And it provides that if a council believes that a member of council is being abusive and is harassing, council can ask the integrity commissioner to apply to court to have that member removed from council. It's pretty significant. It's never been in the legislation before. Whether it gets through before the House rises for the end of the session before the provincial election, we don't know. But it's a significant change, and I think it's come as a result of conduct in a few municipalities, but probably primarily in the City of Ottawa in terms of what's been happening. So let's talk for a moment about the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. This act's been around since 1972. And It's an act that applies to members of council and committees of council, does not apply to staff. And it imposes personal obligations on individual members of council. Historically, it has been inappropriate for members of council to ask staff for specific advice. And that's still true. But now, remember I mentioned that the council member can ask for an opinion in writing from the Integrity Commissioner. That takes away some of the responsibility of staff getting involved. When I work with staff, my advice to them is you should never give specific advice. The courts have said that's inappropriate for you. And now staff should be referring to the member to the Integrity Commissioner if they need further advice. Let's just do a quick overview of the Act, just so you have a sense of what it's about. And here's one thing that's really important and that I've learned over the years doing these sessions, and I've talked to people doing these sessions. People have come to me at the end of the session and said, I'm a one-issue candidate. I want to get that property developed down the street or that I own, and I thought the best way to do it was being on the inside. Well, it's not. If you are thinking of, because you want to influence something that you want the municipality to do that has a direct benefit to you financially, you need to really think about it and do some research and maybe even retain a lawyer to give you legal advice, because you're going to get very frustrated very quickly if you end up on council and find out you cannot do what it was you hoped to do. So what does pecuniary mean? Well, it means financial. If you're elected to office, one of your greatest challenges, I think, over the first year is trying to learn how to pronounce pecuniary. It's never easy to do. But it's part of the requirement of the Act. So we're dealing with financial interests. And there are both direct and indirect financial interests. And let me give you an example of a direct financial interest. Let's suppose I own Fred's Widget Shop on Main Street, and there's a tender going to council to be awarded for the supply of widgets, and I have bid on the project. When this item comes forward, or at the beginning of the council meeting, I would declare a pecuniary interest. Your worship, I want to declare a pecuniary interest on item 4 because I own Fred's Widget Shop. Clearly, that's a pecuniary, it's got a financial implication. But there are a number of indirect pecuniary interests as well. These are family, parent, spouse, or child, if the interest is known to you. There's employment if you're employed by a company. If you are a shareholder in a company, there's rules around ownership of companies and relationships. So if it's Fred's Widgets Limited, that still is my pecuniary interest and I have to declare it. There are others relating to organizations within your community. This is worth having a look at. There's a textbook called Ontario's Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, a handbook. And it's published by Municipal World. Municipal World, if you Google Municipal World, you'll find their website. They have a number of publications, but this one is worth having a look at if you have any concerns around relationships and potential pecuniary interests. Take a look at it. So what do you have to do if you have a pecuniary interest and you're a council member and the matter's on the council? Well, the first thing, you have to make a declaration at the meeting. And this has been in the Act since 1972. Just as I did a moment ago at the beginning, you make a verbal declaration of the pecuniary interest and the general nature of it. A couple of years ago, the Act was changed in a number of significant ways, but one of the ways is that you must now also file the declaration in writing with the clerk. And the clerk has to take both the verbal and the written and put it into a registry. So anybody can go look as to when you declared a pecuniary interest or whether you didn't on a particular issue declare a pecuniary interest. So it's available. That registry is now available to the public. I want to backtrack for 1 minute because I want to mention municipalities are filled with special people and employees that work incredibly hard. And I know that because I've been around them for a long time. There are two people, though, if you're thinking of running for office, that you need to be aware of and you may want to talk to. And the first is the Chief Administrative Officer. I mentioned that this is the person who has the day-to-day management, but it's also the primary person providing advice and recommendations to council. So if you have issues around policy or around various issues in that respect, have a chat with the CAO. The second person that you need to get to know is the clerk. The clerk's the expert when it comes to meetings. The clerk is the expert when it comes to how to get items on the meetings and what the rules are. You need to befriend these people. They work hard for your benefit, and it might be worth. The clerks are now looking at me saying, "Oh my gosh, I don't have time for all these phone calls." Phone them. It's really important. And the clerk has the responsibility, too, of administering the election. That's under the Municipal Elections Act. So pretty important person within the organization. There are lots of other important ones, but I think from the point of view of being a candidate, CAO and the municipal clerk, really key. Back to the Conflict of Interest Act. I got off track. So at the meeting, if you have a pecuniary interest, you have to declare it both verbally and in writing. But there are other things. The Act says you may not participate, influence, or vote on that matter when it comes before council or committee. Participating, voting is pretty clear. Influence, though, influence goes beyond the meeting, and it's any time before the meeting or after the meeting. And the Act's been changed to make it clear that influence means influencing another member of council or staff. So be really cautious around that. And any of those, if you miss any of those 5 items, that's a breach of the Act, and action could be taken with respect to it. In 1972, up to a couple of years ago, if a ratepayer or an elector in your community had a complaint against a member believing they had a pecuniary interest, their remedy was to go to court. That's an expensive process. But that was the remedy. Bring an application to court. That changed. And now, if someone, an elector in the community, and who can complain has been expanded. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but it's expanded beyond just electors in the community. Now, the complaint can be made to the Integrity Commissioner. A much simpler process, and the Integrity Commissioner will investigate and report. And the Integrity Commissioner has the authority, the power to make an application to court, to bring it to court for a determination. And an elector can also still do that. That's the power they've also had all the way along. The court has significant power and opportunity to deal with the issue after hearing the evidence. The court can issue a reprimand or not a significant penalty, but it can go all the way up to removing a member from council and keeping a member of council, a person from being on council for up to 7 years. That's pretty significant. So this new process that makes it easier to complain, both for conflict of interest and codes of conduct, means that we've seen a significant number and a significant increase in the number of complaints under this new regime that we have. And keep in mind this, the cost of all these complaints is borne by the municipality. So there's a significant cost potentially. In some municipalities, there's no cost at all because they aren't seeing any claims under the conflict of interest legislation or under the code of conduct. I was at a municipality the other night and they have not had one complaint under either of those in the last 2 years. But there are some municipalities that are dealing with significant numbers of complaints and investigations that have been ongoing. Spend some time taking a look at the conflict of interest legislation and how it might impact you. And you may need to get some advice to assist you in determining if it is going to be appropriate for you to run for council. Municipal members of council carry around with them a lot of confidential information. It's in their head, it's on their computer, it's in hard copies. It's part of the leadership role of being a leader of the community. It doesn't matter what form that information is. Members of council have an obligation to maintain the confidentiality, to keep everything confidential that the municipality requires be confidential. That means being careful when you're having conversations with people. I talk about the coffee shop. Do people go to coffee shops now to have conversations? I'm not sure, but it used to be a big issue. Be careful what you're saying on the internet. Be careful what you're saying to people in the grocery store. Understand that the obligation is upon you to ensure that that information is kept confidential. I mentioned before that individual members of council, other than the head of council, do not speak on behalf of the municipality. That responsibility is given to the head of council. Everyone remembers Walkerton, the tragic events that occurred. The province reacted very quickly and enacted the Safe Drinking Water Act 2002. And that act, when passed, was considered either the best or one of the best safe drinking water regulations in the world. It's really significant. The province passed that act, but left out one section that was to come into effect, and that section dealt with personal liability of decision makers. Decision makers. Gee, I've heard that term. That's members of council. It's also your senior staff and your water operator. So this personal liability section was left off. And wasn't brought into effect in 2002. And frankly, we thought we stopped thinking about it. It wasn't on our radar as municipal staff until the summer of 2012, 10 years later. And the province announced that section was coming into effect on January 2013, and it did. There was a scramble to educate members of council what it meant, and what their responsibilities individually, and to get training in terms of what's appropriate. About 6 weeks into 2013, I was speaking at a conference in Toronto, doing some training on this legislation, and a case had come out the week before where a water operator in southwestern Ontario had been charged a number of years earlier, and the sentence came down, and he went to jail. And there was a substantial fine against him and against the municipal corporation. At that session was the mayor of that municipality, and he and I chatted at the break, and he said, "Can I talk to this group?" Sure, that'd be great. And he did. And he said this, that had that section, that personal liability section, been in effect, he and the members of council had been told by the lawyers for the municipality and for the chief water operator and by the lawyers for the ministry that all members of council would have been charged, probably charged. I'm not telling you about this to scare you, but I am telling you about this that you understand that there are significant responsibilities that go with the job of being a member of council, that you have to take it seriously, you have to do the training that's required, you have to understand what your obligations are. Municipalities, every municipality carries policies of insurance, and those policies are certainly in play when there's issues of liability involved. If you are properly trained on this, like any other part of the municipal operation, and you act in a reasonable way, that's a reasonable standard for members of council generally, there should be no concern about personal liability. The protection the insurer gives you, the protection the municipality gives you, but treat it as something that you have to pay attention to, as something that requires your time and your attention. And again, this is one more addition to all those meetings and all those other things that are going on from day to day. So let's sum it up. I think you need to understand your role and the role of the other people within the organization. What's everybody doing? What's the reporting relationship? Who talks to who and in what context? Understand that role. It's important. Powers rest with council, municipal powers, and you source back powers to the council itself, and that comes from provisions set out by the province. You're not going to be a manager, you're not going to direct work, and if you think you're going to be doing that, and if you are doing that, that's really detrimental to the organization, in my opinion, over the years. Take some time and understand your personal obligations. That has a lot of layers to it, as I've talked about, both in terms of family and understanding what the various pieces of legislation and bylaws are. Talk to your family, because it's a decision that I think the whole family has to be part of and participate in. Finally, I said before, this will consume you. It is so much fun. It is such a rare opportunity to give back to your community. It's a lot of work, but people who are on council and are giving back to their community in a real way, there's some incredible satisfaction to that. Congratulations, whether you run or not, congratulations for at least thinking about it. I think it's an important decision, and I commend you for doing so. Having said that, we can do questions if there are any, Vicki.
Great,
we can take the slides down if you could.
I'd like to thank you, Fred, for a very insightful, informative presentation. It was great. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to now open the floor for questions. So you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, and we will, the host will allow you to unmute yourself when we're ready for you to ask the question. And also there's some questions that already exist in our written questions. So I think I'm going to start with those. So the first question that came in was, you noted the role of council. Can you please repeat what that role is again?
Sure. Council represents the public. That's a responsibility that's set out in the Municipal Act, and that's where you'll find this responsibility. And that's not surprising, is it? Members of council are talking to the public regularly. You bring the issues that the public believe are important to council, or the opinion that they will have on particular issues. So you represent the public at this council table. Council exercises corporate powers, and I talked about council being like the board of directors of a business corporation, and that's exactly what it is. We saw in Section 5 of the Municipal Act that the council exercises powers of the municipality by passing bylaws. Council has to consider the best interest and well-being of the municipality. And I said the municipality represents the community, if you will, the geographical boundaries and the community within that, but it also means the municipal corporation. Members of council have an obligation to act in the best interest of this broader community as well as the municipal corporation itself. The Act provides that council acts collectively, publicly, and with notice. You have to tell the public that you're holding meetings, whether they're open or closed, whether they're council meetings or committee meetings. And at the end of the day, something gets passed by virtue of a majority vote. That's the test that's in the Municipal Act. There are no management responsibilities given to council or members of council in the legislation, and I think that's important. The line is I think, very clear. Council is the decision-making body, and staff are the people that implement and provide advice to council. That's it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Next question. What is the rule of workshops that have a quorum of council?
Say that, what is the rule or the role?
If the rule of having a workshop when you have quorum.
Oh, that's an interesting question. And it became an interesting question about 10, 15 years ago. Municipalities used to hold workshops and they did them with some degree of regularity, and nobody believed they were a meeting. We just held workshops and people showed up and most of the council was there and whatever. The province then changed the rules. Remember I said there were reasons you could go into a closed meeting as a council or a committee, and made it clear that training, education and training was a meeting of council. And so if it's a meeting of council, that has to have all the trappings. It has to have notice, you have to have an agenda, you have to put all the material out, whether it's open or it's closed, but it is a meeting. And the expectation is that if it's a meeting, you will have a quorum of council at it.
Great, thank you. The next question is actually one that we were probably going to address. It's where do we get further information or answers to questions on nomination and campaigning rules? I believe I mentioned that at the beginning, that you need to go to your own municipality where you intend on running to get that kind of information. Go to their website for the nomination process and see what you need to do to file a nomination. And then you can find out more information about their specific campaigning rules that they may have for their municipality. And the next question came through, I believe on one of your slides you had IC as an acronym, and I'm pretty sure that referred to the Integrity Commissioner, correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Well, that's a really good lesson. Thank you. Whenever you're speaking to a group, it's important that the group understand what you're talking about. And so you have to be careful with acronyms. I always generally refer to them as TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, but this is a 2-letter acronym. I've had some interesting experiences where people who I thought were in the know on a particular subject weren't. So thank you for the question. IC means Integrity Commissioner, who's an officer of the corporation appointed by council.
Okay, thank you. Can you give us an example of something that would be confidential?
Sure. Municipality has been approached. The CAO met with a developer or someone who wants to bring a business to town, or someone who wants to buy a piece of property, municipal property, or sell it. It would be inappropriate to make that public right at the outset. There needs to be some discussion about it. buying and selling property is one of the subject matters for which council can go into a closed meeting. It cannot approve a sale or a purchase. That has to ultimately be done by passing a bylaw in public. But the negotiations, what price are you going to authorize your CAO or your staff to go negotiate for this property? That's appropriate to be kept confidential until you're farther down the process and ready to make it public.
Okay, how do you see how artificial intelligence and other digital technologies have affected our developing comprehensive policies? Or do you think that is derived from the federal or provincial organizations?
Wow, that's over my head. I'm not sure. Technology is going to continue to play a role. It seems to me, though, that just highlights the importance of staff doing the proper research and providing good advice to council, whether it's through staff or potentially your committee structure. And they're going to have to be dealing with that. We're just at the beginning of what I think are such significant changes worldwide in so many different areas. So how AI is going to play into this, I can't speculate.
Thank you. Is it expected that councillors are in their role full-time, or is it normal for them to have other jobs?
Yes. Having said that, it depends where you are in the province. It depends how council determines. I get to spend a lot of time in small communities. I'm talking under 2,000 people. And the expectation there is that you run for council. It's a part-time salary and a full-time job. Some councils designate their members of council as full-time, and they have support staff and all the rest to do that. Most municipalities throughout the province don't. It's a decision by council in terms of what level. But I can tell you, remember I said this consumes you. It takes a lot of time. I don't care if you're considered part-time or not. You will spend a lot of hours in meetings, a lot of hours preparing, and a lot of hours dealing with the public in various settings. It's all-consuming. It takes over.
Well, on that note, is it acceptable for councillors who run or operate a business to continue doing so after being elected to office, or is it expected that they would shut down their business or hire someone else to manage it?
You know, that was the question that was asked in 1972, because a member of council continued to operate a business, and he was found by the court, this is before this act came into effect, to be in a conflict situation, and he was removed from council. The province reacted by passing this legislation. And yes, you can be on council and you can run your business, and I think councils would be at a detriment if that weren't the case. The issue, I was going to say warning, well, it's really a warning. The issue is you need to be aware of when that business will be interacting with the municipality, when there's a pecuniary interest. And you may want to get some advice. That book will be helpful. You may want to get some legal advice from someone who does municipal law to talk about that relationship. It can hinder you depending on the type of business, but understand that if you have a business and you have a pecuniary interest, if you do those things you have to do, you declare verbally and in writing, you don't influence, you don't participate, and you don't vote, you're entitled to operate that business. When you have a pecuniary interest, you have to give up your council role. That's the obligation under the Act.
We do have a couple, or we do have one person with their hand up. So while oh, no, they've changed their mind. So I'll continue with the written questions. If an individual has lost everything due to the pandemic and is living out of their car with no home address, are they allowed to run for council? So they have no fixed address.
That's a clerk's question. Talk to the clerk in your local municipality.
Okay. Do all municipalities have the same timeliness for this year's municipal election?
Yes.
Are there any regulations surrounding municipal election financing that are provincially directed, such as disclosure, what your amount limits are, that kind of thing?
Do you want to answer that? Yes,
That
is
would
the
be
answer.
the Municipal Elections Act.
Yep.
What is the difference between a local councillor and a regional councillor?
It's a good question. And it varies from place to place around the province. In some places, people who are elected to the lower tier, the town council, the city council, are automatically on the upper tier, the regional council. Other places, certain people are elected to the upper tier council directly during the election. Other places, it's by office. Remember, I mentioned the mayor of that community. The mayors of all the communities in that county automatically went to the upper tier of the county. So you have to look at each one and determine how your upper tier, your regional council gets constituted, who's on it, and how do they get there.
Okay, next question. The big buzz these days is the need to innovate and reinvent the government. So in short, bureaucracy is the main reason we're not solving the climate crisis. Managing and direction of staff to do the right thing is needed. What powers does a mayor have to reinvent the city and how it operates on a day-to-day operation? Asking staff to do tasks as issues arise?
The mayor has the leadership responsibilities that I talked about, the leadership to council. At the end of the day, and a lot goes into that and a lot of opportunities. Can the mayor direct staff to do that? No. It's a council decision. Council can direct staff to undertake research on a particular area to do certain things. The role of the mayor is to lead council. My experience in municipalities, the CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, and the head of council are talking regularly about what direction the municipality should be going, getting council to move on that, and then getting staff to provide the advice and information needed.
Okay, why does Burlington not have local councillors, but Oakville, Milton, and Halton Hills do?
Burlington does have local councillors. All the members of council of Burlington and Halton Hills and Oakville and Milton are local councillors.
Where do I find out more information on the confidentiality that is expected of councillors?
Talk to the CAO or the clerk or the municipal lawyer.
I'm not sure the details. Can you share this, what the salary is? I'm not sure what the question is, whose salary they want to know about, but the salaries of elected officials?
Salaries of all elected officials are found in a bylaw of the municipality. You can go look for that, or alternatively, you might want to speak to someone at the municipality, one of the staff, and they can direct you in terms of the remuneration that's paid. By the way, it's not salary, it's remuneration, because members of council are not employees of the corporation.
Can someone run for council who does not live in the municipality or ward?
There's several parts to that. You need to look at the requirements in the Municipal Elections Act. and see what the requirements are. They're fairly well set out. With respect to living in the ward, if you're in a municipality with wards, you do not have to live in the ward in which you are running. You can live in another part of the municipality, and you're eligible to run in that in any ward that you consider is appropriate.
I'm not sure if this is a question for you or one that should probably be directed to your the local municipality, but maybe you have a ballpark figure on what amount of money is typically required to fund a campaign?
I have no idea.
No, that you'd want to check with your municipality. We can at least tell you how to raise the funds and what your ballpark figure is. Follow up on another one, I think. The Municipal Elections Act specifically states the candidate must live in the municipality to run for council. Why is it a clerk issue?
I'm not sure that's what the Municipal Elections Act says.
Well, we can always get back to you if you want to contact any of the clerks or your municipality. What rules limit influence of lobby groups on staff who have limited recommendations or present recommendations to council that may not be in the interest of the public?
There's an ability for a municipality to have a lobby registry. Some municipalities do, the vast majority do not. That would have to be in place to deal with any lobbying issues that get recorded.
Okay, I think that ends our written questions, and we have one hand up. Is that, can we bring that person in?
We have a question from Keith DeMoe. Keith, are you able to unmute yourself?
Do we have Keith DeMoe wanting to ask a question? Did he want to unmute? No. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question while we're working it out with Keith. We have a follow-up on the lobbying question. Is there not a code of conduct for staff that also precludes influence and has them declare conflicts?
There are codes in relation to staff conduct, and all the employment rules would affect that, and you'd have to check with the specific municipality with respect to that. I know in Sudbury we had a code around influencing, staff influencing, and various aspects that were involved.
Okay, that concludes the written questions. We still have a hand up. We'll give him a oh, hang on a second. I think I might have another question in the meantime.
Keith, we've unmuted you. Would you like to speak?
Okay. Again? Oh, we're getting a, I believe he's going to type his question. Let me just read out one of the other questions in the meantime. If Elon Musk became mayor, would an entrepreneur like him be able to push positive social change within the city, or would the bureaucracy kill innovative ideas? What roadblocks would prevent what most would say is needed to change how government is run?
Well, in large measure, the requirements, most of the requirements around governance within municipalities are set by the province. There are a number of rules and a number of regulations, and both staff and council are obligated to fit within the confines of what that provincial legislation provides. And there, as I said earlier, there's well over 120 statutes that impact, provincial statutes that impact local government.
There is a question here, but I believe I would just refer this to our municipalities again. If you were going to run for council in Oakville, how much would you budget for your campaign? So I would suggest that you contact us here at the town if you're looking at running in Oakville, and we can give you more information on that. Okay, I have a typed question from the individual that was trying to come through. So do candidates have to provide details of where they're getting their funding from?
That's a clerk question.
That would be a yes. At the end of the election, you'd have to submit all of your campaign details to us.
We will also just add to that, that there is a maximum campaign expense that candidates cannot go over.
Okay, I think that concludes all of our questions. So before we conclude this session altogether, we'd like to just put out a couple of reminders. First of all, remember that nominations open on May 2nd. And so check your municipality's website for the nomination process and whether you need an appointment to file your nomination papers. And remember that you need at least 25 endorsements from eligible voters, and it must be on the legislated form that is provided to you. And lastly, candidates must not accept contributions for election purposes or incur any expenses until your nomination papers have been filed. So I want to thank you, and thank you, Fred Dean, and all of our partners and participants, and we wish you all a good night. Thank you.